Hi, I'm Dr. Kathy Lucier, and welcome to Education 10, Principles of Learning Strategies. This class is about how you learn and how you can learn better. Module 9A. All right, we're getting down to the home stretch, and you're probably starting to think about final exams and maybe final papers. So how about I talk about note-taking and learning strategies? Does that sound good? Specifically, I'm going to go over how to mark textbooks and articles to help you study for those exams and essays. Now, I've gone over active note-taking a little bit already, so some of this is going to sound pretty familiar, like that note-taking helps you be actively engaged, it helps you condense information, you already know it increases your comprehension and recall. But what I'm going to talk about today is that there are strategies you can use when you're taking your notes that can make it more effective as a study tool later on. So here's 4 steps to marking chapters and articles. The first is I want you to think about how you highlight information when you're reading. It's more time efficient for rereading later to highlight. Okay, you know that, but what should you be highlighting? Well, research shows that you should do phrases, not sentences. People used to advise only also using keywords, but what we're now finding is that you should actually include the linking words as well. It makes it easier when you're going back and reading. Here's a quick test. I want you to only read this portion of the slide with the highlights and the colors on it and see if it's faster when you're reviewing. Go ahead and do it. I'll wait. Was that easier? It should have been, because you had those linking words to cue you up. Now, underlining. Underlining does work. It helps you keep reading and stay active, but it is less effective than highlighting. If you had a choice between the two, you should pick highlighting. But why? If you guessed where your eye placement is, you'd be correct. It's because your eye, when you underline, your eye is looking at that blank space. Unlike in highlighting, when your focus is on the word itself, it does make a difference. Number 3, make notes in the margins. But what kind? And that's something to think about. What kind of notes are you writing in the margins? What research shows is that you could be not only actively engaged by writing notes, but what kind of notes matters. So here's some suggestions. For example, when I write notes, I use symbols. I won't write out whole words. I will create a kind of symbol lexicon. For example, I'll write T with a circle around it if I think an item's going to be on the test, or EX, for example, or R with a circle around it if I want to signal that this quotes research to prove this little section here. You could summarize big ideas, you could jot a key word, or you could have a little bit of fun. Maybe be super opinionated when you're reading that article or chapter and make notes about whether or not you think it's biased or whether you think it's silly. I have a friend who works over at the Huntington, and that's a museum in Pasadena. Technically San Marino, but we won't get into that. It's Pasadena for most of us. And she says Sir Richard Burton, the explorer, not the famous actor, has a bunch of personal journals and science books where he made notes in the margins. And some of the notes are his opinions. He says things like balderdash and utter rot in the margins as he's reading through them. And now we have those and we can see what he thought as he was doing that, which is kind of cool. So maybe you should do that too. Let's see what else. Number 4, you could also try creating test questions in the margins. We talked a little bit about how to do this in reading strategies. So if you don't remember, go back to that module and look at that one up. But what if the margins are too narrow? Or what if you only have a printout that's someone else's, like a friend's or a copy from the library? Well, you can write them somewhere else. You could write it in your notebook, you could type it on your laptop, or you could even just be as simple as putting a Post-it note on the library copy. You know, that way you still have those notes, you're still interactive, but it's not ruining the example that you can't write on. What other note-taking formats are there that can help you study at the end of the quarter? Well, first off, there are flashcards. You've probably heard of them, and maybe, in fact, an old pro at using flashcards. So how about leveling them up by using a flashcard app to take advantage of those pockets of study time that is really effective for helping you divide up your study into little chunks across a day. Also, having them digitally on your phone makes it easier to share with a friend or a study buddy at a distance. Now, there are a whole bunch of flashcard apps. I just picked the 3 that seem to be the most popular when I Googled them. Besides flashcards, what about the other 2 formats? How about visual concept maps? Now, visual concept maps is a way to let you not only practice organizing the information and seeing it related to each other, but also chunking it together to get it into your memory. Remember, chunking makes recall more efficient. So there are 3 basic sort of visual concept maps I want you to think about and see if you've been using any of these. Now, the first one, line maps, is where you draw like a tree with all its sub-branches and you're just showing how the topics relate and you're trying to remember everything. Here's an example of it as motivation. Now, this one is not as effective as the other 2 I'm going to show you, mostly because it's easy to make mistakes when you're trying to remember this one. And that's because it doesn't really go in order. Now, that's where this next one, hierarchical maps, comes into play. Here it is with motivation again. See, this version works really well to help you recall information because you're listing the information in order. Now, of course, you've got to have information that has a natural progression. If it doesn't work very well for this one. But otherwise, this one's an outstanding way to help you recall information and kind of get it all out in its steps. The last one is called semantic web. And this is a visual concept map that is like a starburst where you're just kind of remembering like a clock or a star, all the points that relate to the main idea. Now, besides visual concept maps, where you're practicing kind of visualizing all the information together and how it relates, the other way is making a chart. Now, charts are the best for comparing and contrasting items, events, or characters. There are 2 types of charts I'm going to talk about today. The first is the matrix version, which is the most common format. Here's one set up to compare the planets and their properties. And you can see it looks like a table. This is really good if you have maybe characters in a story or items on a chart of some sort, like developmental stages that you want to compare. The next is the visual version. And this one helps to convey a lot of information really quickly. You can see it all at a glance. For example, if we were comparing solar system objects, maybe I want to ask you about Earth compared to Mars. And I say, are they the same size? If you take a quick look, you can see how Earth and Mars compare. Are they the same size? Before this visual comparison, a lot of folks would think Mars is nearly the same size as Earth. But as you can see, it's really not. Okay, besides these 3 different kind of methods, what other strategies or metacognitive items should you consider when creating notes to help you study? Well, I have 2 more things to think about. The first is, are you marking too much of the text? Are you somebody who highlights way too much information or underlines everything, which is making it just harder to study later on? Well, the reason for this is that you're not actually making decisions. You're reading passively. Your brain's not engaged. And so what's happening is you're not judging information. You're saying it's all important. Now, that's interesting because the flip side of this is, are you marking almost nothing? In which case you're doing the same thing. You're still not making decisions. And so what you need to do to solve this is pretty straightforward. Either mark less if you're marking everything, or mark more. Decide what's important. It's that decision making that's actually activating more parts of your brain. Another thing to consider, in my kind of last 2 little points here, is did your book already come with highlights or notes? Or if you're using the Kindle app and it says many people highlighted this section, that also can lead to passive reading, because you're just defaulting to what other people have done. The way to get around this is to judge their choices. Decide for yourself each time you hit a section, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? And then make a note, because that way you're still participating with the information. And also privately, I think those ones that come pre-highlighted or that say many people underline this should tell us what grade they got when they did that. I'm just saying. Thanks for listening.